Hi, I'm Joshua Fox. I gave this talk at LessWrong Tel Aviv in September, and I'm doing it again in English for a worldwide audience. Now, a disclaimer, this emerges from my work at my startup, rightjoin.io, which helps software engineers change jobs, but it's mostly not about what we do in the startup, because now I'm going to talk about a long process of tracking your own career. But I did learn a lot as I did the startup. I spoke with dozens of people, and I hope you learned something too. So, first, question, what are your goals in life? Secondly, how do you decide when to change jobs? And third, how do you get yourself a better job once you've decided to change? Now, you're supposed to set a goal for your career, a long-term goal. I don't know anyone who has. At job interviews, they ask you, where do you plan to be in 5 years? I know very few people who have any real idea other than doing pretty much what they're doing now. So I think that few people can really work that way. But what you can do is decide what you want in life, your utility functions. Not looking ahead 5 years or 40 years, but just saying, what do you want out of your job? Do you want happiness, interesting work, money? Do you want career, prestige, people looking up to you on the job? Do you want independence without a boss annoying you? How about job security? Well, most people want all these things in some mixture, and you have to decide what your mixture is. Now, the strange things I've noticed about them is that they're correlated. So, if you get promoted because you're a great worker, you're doing well, they give you more money, but also they give you more interesting problems to work on. You get admired more. You get to work independently, and they're less likely to fire you. So if you're doing well and climbing up, then this is very good. Unlike so many things in life where you make a trade-off, you don't make a trade-off here. Although I'd like to thank Anthony Vorobey from the LessWrong meeting, who pointed out that if you're creative enough, you can find the trade-offs that other people haven't found. For example, asking to work half-time. Very few people do that, but in high tech where the salaries are good, why not? If that's what you're looking for. Get somewhat less money for more free time. So sometimes you can find a trade-off. Usually you can go for them all, and that's a good thing. That is in a single career, in a single job category. But if you decide on a different path, then you can make these trade-offs. This is my cousin who explores nature most of the time, traveling and writing about it, and that's really a wonderful thing. Now here the trade-offs are very different from a software engineering job, and so that is a major decision that you can make, where you can decide which of these things you want. Most of what I'm saying now is targeted at software engineers and similar tech professionals, because that's what so many of us are. Although very little of it is specific to us. It's just who I happen to be thinking about when I put these ideas together. How do you decide when to change jobs? In ancient Rome, they had the cursus honorum. That meant the path of honor. You were, if you were a nobleman, you would walk along this path, being promoted from a curule to praetor, consul. Of course, as you went farther along, fewer people would be promoted, so there was a lot of competition, occasional daggers, but it was a very well-defined path. So this is different from a promotion ladder in a company or an army, because it included military and civil and judicial duties. That doesn't exist anymore. In fact, we don't even have the promotion path that people used to follow, where you would work for 40 years in the same job and get gradually promoted higher and higher. That exists in some places. Some lawyers do it, some professors do it, although fewer and fewer. But in general, you're going to have to find another way. I think the reason that this fixed career path has disappeared is the rise of the machines. And that is accelerating change. You can't simply train up for a job and stick to it for all that time with occasional retraining and learning. You have to jump, you have to move as technology pushes out more and more skills and creates new demand. So even if you are in a single category like software engineer, you're going to have to make major changes frequently and probably not stay in the same job. And if you think you can get job security from working in a big company, well, probably not. That company can go bankrupt at any time. You can't rely on it. The way to solve this is to be agenty. Now, I published this post on LessWrong, slightly off topic, but not so off topic, asking what the difference is between officers and enlisted people in armies. Why are there these two very well-defined categories? Well, my conclusion was that the underlying assumption is that officers are agency. They have goals and they decide how to get there, whereas enlisted people are given specific tasks. Of course, that's not true by any means. In all cases, there are plenty of agency enlisted people and not agency officers, but I think that is the underlying assumption of how the system is structured. And you know who's going to be coming back from that visit to the planet. Well, this is a military system, but in software engineering, you're going to have to do it your own way. So at one point you may be Gandalf the Grey, and then you're going to be Gandalf the White. You're going to have to navigate your path. We know about hill climbing. If we work in the fields of machine learning, this idea that you're optimizing, trying to find the high point on this map. You don't want to get stuck on a local maximum, which is to say a hill that's not as tall as another hill. Then again, if you found a pretty good local maximum, that's better than staying in the valley. But the important point is that you have to wind your way through the landscape, and the topography is always changing. You have to decide what your utility function is. There is no map given to you. You have to decide what the high points are. But you can find an advantage in this situation. You know, whenever you're competing against others in a difficult situation, just remember, they have the same difficulties you do. If you can deal with the difficulties better than them, you're going to do very well. And to do this, you're going to have to switch jobs. Like this person who climbed a long way up the cliff and is very happy that he's almost at the top. He's going to have to take a big swing over and grab onto another rock. And if it means falling a bit before catching the next rock, well, there is no choice. You cannot stay there. So when do you change jobs? Track yourself. You've heard about the quantified self, people measuring their blood sugar levels or how much they exercise. Track yourself on the job and ask, is it giving you what you want? Is it giving you interesting new challenges? Do you enjoy it? When you enter a new job, you're not going to be getting a lot at first because you're just getting on board, but soon you're going to be learning and growing and influencing. After a while, though, that growth slows down at the point of diminishing marginal returns. And then you'd better consider changing. Eventually you'll get to the point of diminishing returns. And that's, even if you think that you're doing okay in the job and still producing something, remember that when people see your resume, they're going to think that you're stuck in the mud. You have to change. In tech, I think 3 to 5 years is a good rule of thumb. But like everything else I'm saying today, there are no absolute rules. So if you have a skill that's worth a lot, like Java programming, and you're considering whether to change, you might realize that you're going to suffer from that change in the short run. No longer are you a world-class expert in that thing. If you're a consultant, you might not be able to sell your skills in a new field, like let's say programming in Julia or Go. And so you have to look at this graph, which no one's going to draw for you. You have to guess and take the integral and ask, what is the long-term benefit I get from this skill? Am I willing to take that hit and make the change? Usually you can do this by having more than one area of specialty and then moving over. If you're, for example, doing numerical programming in one software language, you can move into numerical programming in another software language and still be considered an expert. Now, since this is all about LessWrong, I'm going to talk about those big bag biases. Status quo bias keeps us on the same job. People say, it's pretty good here, not all that great, but it could be worse in the next job. Well, remember, it could get worse in this job too, and you might get stuck if you don't keep your skills up to date. The current job is not necessarily better than something else that you might get. And it gets even worse when you get into the sunk cost fallacy. And that's where you say, I've spent all these years studying Java, and I'm just going to keep coding Java as long as I go. That in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I know people who do perfectly well as COBOL programmers. Banks do some pretty heavy-duty work with outdated technologies, and you can make good money from that. But avoid the sunk cost fallacy in your thinking. All this is driven by risk aversion. People are afraid of risk. But if you're a software engineer, you have about less risk than anyone in the world. I like to compare myself to the human average. $6,000 a year, I'm doing well. And even if, unfortunately, I fall into the wrong job and I have to scramble a bit, I'm never going to be as badly off as the average human being. So, risk, we have a lot less risk than other people in this world of technological change. We software engineers are going to be the last to go. So, get rid of that risk aversion, please. Now that you've decided to change jobs, how do you get a better one? Look good. You look fabulous, baby. Remember that skit from Saturday Night Live? It was several decades ago, so I'm dating myself, but there's this character from the fashion industry who goes around telling people, you look fabulous. Because what counts is looks, and that's how it is when you're changing jobs. When you're applying, the new boss doesn't know who you are. She can't look into your soul. All she can see is what she can see. So, if you're the generic cola in a champagne bottle, you're doing great. If you're champagne in a generic cola bottle, you're in trouble. A story, a friend of mine wanted to apply to Harvard, and in a literature department, she knew several languages, and asked a professor to write a recommendation. And he wrote that she's a great student, she knows all these languages, Spanish, Hebrew, French, and Arabic. Now, she didn't know Arabic, and she never said she did, but this professor somehow made a mistake. Perfect, because this went into the application, was very impressive, she was admitted to Harvard. And the moral of the story, if you can fake it honestly, you're doing very well. Now when she gets to Harvard, no one's going to ask if she knows it, and if they do, you just use this formula. Very simple. Say, oh, I'm not such an expert in that topic. Say that about everything. Then, if you really are an expert in the topic, people will think, oh, you're so modest. If you're not an expert, then they'll think that you're an expert, but you're just being modest. If you're not an expert and you get caught, you said you're not an expert, no problem. You have to do things that people see. People outside your company. Write articles. Get a high score in Stack Overflow. Publish open source code. Or publish patents. Now I have very strong negative views about patents. I think the system is broken, but one advantage is that they show employers that you're capable of innovating. It's not a very good signal, but it's the only thing they have. Now, you should still do excellent work on the job. You should still work towards the goals that your management has assigned you. That goes without saying, which is why I haven't said it. But don't forget that the new employer doesn't see your work. In fact, since most coding is not open source, they really have no idea what you did on the job. All that matters is what they see. Don't be afraid to show it. If you have some accomplishments, get them out there. So when I first got started in software development, I wrote articles because that was something I could do. I did it in my spare time, and I felt it would establish my reputation. Eventually, I realized that I could do this on behalf of the company, technical evangelism. So I got the benefit of it, and my employer got the benefit, and my work, which was previously bottled up inside the company, was now visible to the world in the form of these articles. Another piece of advice is to get yourself a tagline as the best in the world in something. So, in Israel, if you want an expert on decision theory, you first think of our Nobel Prize winner, Professor Robert Aumann, and I'm sure that if he was still in consulting and if a CEO needed an expert in that, they would think, get this person on the phone, can we hire him as a consultant? Now, you may not be a Nobel Prize winner, but you don't have to be. For example, this guy is the best buddy of the Prime Minister. He's a lawyer, and if you want to show that you're influential, you hire him to represent you. He has that reputation. When Luke Melhauser of LessWrong was looking for a computer science writer, he didn't just ask, can anyone write computer science articles? I need someone who can write. He said, who are the best computer science journalists? Now, maybe an organization like the Machine Intelligence Research Institute doesn't have the budgets of a large corporation. But I can assure you that a corporation's CEO will hire the person who can fit the bill, who is known as the best in the field, and will care very little about price. This advice is particularly valuable if you're a consultant, somewhat less so if you're an employee. Let's say if you're a front-end JavaScript developer, perfectly lucrative profession, maybe you're not going to be hired as the expert in one thing, but it certainly helps to be known. I know that I once got hired into a very good job because I happened to be in a certain area and management saw that. Honestly, somebody else could have probably done it just as well, but they wanted someone to do that thing. So get yourself a tagline, be known as the expert in something. Do that by publishing, blogging, open source code, getting your name out there. Now there's a book on careerism by Sam Lightstone. I'd like to recommend the book. I really enjoyed it, and the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized that I disagreed with everything in it. That is still a great compliment, because there are very few books that make me do that sort of thinking. One of his concepts is the promotion inversion. He says that since managers don't really know what the workers are doing, they'll often promote based on things like patents and articles. And so people are promoted based not on what really matters. That's true, although there is the opposite. There's also promotion inversion. That's where managers are afraid that status seekers will get ahead, and so they become actively hostile against it. I've seen that happen. I've seen companies that could use some patents in a portfolio, not have any patents because the managers decided they're not going to let the workers get distracted, even though on net the patents would have benefited them. So I think on average, most people need to work more on the externalities, the patents, the articles, and that's what they need to get them ahead. Titles matter. Now, who is this guy? Is he His Royal Highness, Prince Charles, Philip, Arthur, George, Prince of Wales, etc., or is he Chuck? It makes a huge difference. People will tell you that titles don't matter, typically bosses in negotiations. They say, we don't use titles around here. That may be true, but when someone sees your resume, the title is the first thing they see. They see you're a vice president, they consider you for a vice president job. Oh yeah, they'll look into what you actually did, they'll look into a lot of things, but that title is the single most important thing. And you need that on your resume. One tip for getting a title, assuming that you're in good relations with your boss and that your boss likes what you do, is to ask for it informally. So for example, if you're a software engineer and you want to be senior software engineer, just say, I'd like to be a senior software engineer. Avoid the committees, the formal process, the approvals. The boss will much prefer that you do it informally, and then you can put it on your resume. My rule for resumes is that you should write things that are as good as you possibly can on the condition that they're the truth, and I define the truth as follows. If somebody were to ask my ex-bosses, were to investigate whether something is true and were to confirm what I say, then it's true. So in other words, if the boss said that's your title, I think that's a reasonable basis to write on your resume, and a lot easier than the formal way of going about it. So one interesting thing I found is that when people get into the industry, their title after about 3 years sets their career for decades. Now that may be because I got into this at the very peak of the dot-com bubble in the end of 1998, when people were promoted to vice president within a few years of entering, and they themselves will say definitely they were not qualified for it. But you know what? 15 years later, they're still vice presidents and so on, and 15 years later, the people who were software engineers are still software engineers. There are exceptions, but in general, the title you get within the first few years matters a lot. So get yourself a good title and start your career with good timing. No, that's hard to do, but at the very least, take advantage of bubbles to push yourself up there, even if you're not going to get rich from stock options. Use that bubble pressure to get yourself a title. Once you've got a title, there's a perverse incentive to change jobs. You see, your new employer doesn't really know how long you've had that new title. So they see that you're a senior software engineer, and they're going to have to induce you to come over, and they might give you an even better title. Meanwhile, your current boss is not going to want to promote you too often, and so once you've had that promotion, you're going to have to wait a while for the next one. That's presuming that on your resume it doesn't say exactly when you stepped up to each new title within your current job. Generally, that's not the way people do it, so there's this very strange incentive to change jobs once you've got a new title. Next tip is that you're not Ken and you're not Dennis, you're not Thompson and you're not Richie, the gurus of Unix and C. You're not going to be a coding graybeard. Some people are, but you need a security blanket. You need a usable title before you get too old. There is a lot of age discrimination out there, and you need a title that people will accept on an old person, which means over age 35. You know, in some old economies, jobs were divided up by ethnic group. In the steel mills or the slaughterhouses of Chicago, or in the railway system, immigrants from different countries got different jobs. Now, maybe that shows a certain sort of bias or bigotry, but nowadays, the same thing is true for age groups. So, a lot of different job titles will work for you over age 35, but not software engineer. It could be development manager, it could be architect, product manager, project manager, program manager, release manager. A lot of different titles that don't necessarily mean you're managing people. And you can keep on coding. Generally, companies don't mind if you code, but you need to take that step up. You know, managers will brag, we have a young and vibrant workforce. Well, they would never say that about an ethnic group. They would never say we have an Aryan and vibrant workforce in our company. So get ready for that before it hits you. Now, I've given you all this advice about how to show off, how to signal, but you must avoid signaling subgoal stomp. Your goals are what you set yourself. We talked about them before, whether it's money, prestige, interesting work. And to get them, you have to signal. And this is your subgoal. But if you do this too much, you'll get to the point where you look back at what you've done over the last few years and you realize it's all show, no substance. Is this what I really want to be doing with my life? So watch out for that. For most people, though, you better start working on signaling. Now, how to get this next job? Always be looking. It's very beneficial to maneuver into your next job while you're still employed. I think, in fact, if you're truly unemployed, it might be a good idea to do a little bit of freelance work and say you're working as a consultant to make yourself seem employed. As long as you're telling the truth, you're allowed to do that, because it helps your negotiation, and managers don't want to hire unemployed people. But the worst part of it is acting like you don't care, while still letting the employer know that you care enough that they want to hire you. It's a lot like dating. You can't be overeager. It's much better if they come to you. This was a popular style of prison breaks in France in the last few years. It didn't happen once, it happened many times until they put netting over the prisons. It's much better to be pulled out of your current job than to have to work your way out. And achieving that balance is actually something we worked on in RightJoin, creating mechanisms to allow the two sides to approach each other without looking overeager. One way of doing this is informational interviews. That means that you contact a peer in the other company to talk. So, for example, if you're a software engineer, look up someone who does similar work to you, send them an email with a link to your online profiles, your online information, so they know who you are, and say you'd like to talk about this company. Software engineers, unlike managers, are not stuck in meetings all day, and are happy to talk to a fellow professional. And in this case, it's better if you're not looking for a job and you really do want to get information on the company. And yes, eventually you may want to switch. If you hit it off with this person, then they'll pass on your resume, and then you've solved that problem of looking overeager, because you're not applying for a job. They're passing you on and recommending you as someone to be recruited. So this is a good way of hacking the system, not sending your resume to jobs at the company, not contacting a hiring manager. Now, to conclude this, I'm going to not list the usual set of conclusions, but instead raise some questions. First of all, what's the best way to learn your own utility function? I'm not talking about utility function over your entire life, just over your work, over your job. What do you really want in a job? Can a machine learn it better than you? So can we pull information out of a person's workday and learn what this person really wants? And the next question is, what's the best career hack you know? I'd love to learn hacks like getting your promotion titles informally, hacks like getting yourself a usable title before you hit age 35, hacks like informational interviews. And feel free to contact me with your follow-up, with your comments about this presentation. Thanks.